Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into polished boots you didn't choose, buttoning up a stiff-wool dress that doesn't quite fit, and walking through the grand front doors of a house that will never be your home. You're not a maid, you're not a guest. You're something in between, something no one quite knows where to put. A governess. You won't believe this, but despite earning less than most cooks, you're expected to speak French, play piano, quote Latin, and teach history, without wrinkling your cuffs or your pride. Welcome to your first post. Welcome to obscurity. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, post your location and local time in the comments. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You stand at the edge of the gravel drive, your valise in one hand, your reference letters, signed in smudged ink by the headmistress of Miss Parsons' seminary, in the other. Before you looms Winmere House, all grey stone and silence, with turrets pointing toward the grim English sky. The butler doesn't smile. Of course he doesn't. His eyebrows twitch when you give your name. Then he vanishes inside without a word. You linger like cold tea on the doorstep, unsure whether to follow. You're not important enough for a proper welcome, but too refined to let yourself in. When the door finally creaks open again, it's a scullery maid who leads you in. Her apron is stained with beetroot. She mumbles your name wrong, then disappears down the servants' passage. Your arrival? Not a moment of note, not even worth gossip. In the drawing room, the mistress looks you over like a side of beef, but less appetizing. Her own daughter sulks beside her, poking the hem of your travelling gown with a stockinged toe. You'll be teaching arithmetic, French, geography, and scripture, the mistress says, as if listing pests in the attic. No supper in the dining room. We'll have a tray sent up. The governess before you, Miss Crowthorne, left abruptly. They don't say why. You'll find out soon enough. Upstairs, your room awaits. If you expected anything near the children's quarters, think again. You're shown to a narrow staircase behind a linen press and told to keep your boots off the carpets. It smells like boiled cabbage and old socks. Your chamber is under the eaves. The ceiling slants like it's ashamed. One iron bed, one washing stand with a crack in the bowl, one chair with a splintering seat. The wallpaper peels in strips behind the wardrobe, and the fireplace, cold. The housemaid says they don't light fires in governess rooms until November. It's October and raining. You unpack with deliberate care. You hang your one good dress on the back of the door, not too close to the wall, lest the damp stains it. Your books go on the windowsill. Miss Parsons' Dictionary of Moral Instruction, your battered copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and a pressed flower Bible from a school friend you'll probably never see again. The school bell in the hallway clangs suddenly. It isn't for you, it's for the footman. But still, you flinch. Already the house is shaping you, bending your edges. You glance at the only mirror in the room. A spot of rust has eaten through its centre, leaving your reflection like a ghost's. You barely recognise the eyes staring back. A knock, a tray. Dinner has arrived. Grey mutton, a heel of bread, and tea that smells faintly of iron. No pudding, of course. The pudding is for the dining room. You eat in silence, careful not to drip anything on the counterpane. You're not sure if anyone ever washes it. Later you sit by the window watching smoke curl from chimneys that don't warm your room. Somewhere below, music plays faintly. A piano waltz. Perhaps the lady of the house is entertaining guests. Perhaps the children are dancing. You aren't invited. You sip the last of the metallic tea. The wind rattles the sash. You're here now. The children are asleep, and so too are your chances of ever being anything else. The next morning begins before the sun bothers to rise. There's no bell for you, no polite knock, just the faint groan of pipes in the walls and the creak of footsteps overhead. You wake beneath a blanket that never quite warms and dress by candlelight, trying not to shiver. Downstairs the kitchen bustles with clatter and clinks, but you're not welcome there. The cook doesn't look up when you pass. The scullery maid glares like you've stolen her toast. You take your lukewarm tea and half-slice of oatcake back upstairs to prepare your lessons. Your pupils, Clara, age 9, and Felix, age 7. Clara corrects your Latin. She's wrong, but she does it with such cold certainty that for a moment you doubt yourself. Felix asks why your dress is so ugly. Then he tells you Miss Crowthorne used to cry. You smile, thinly, and begin reciting the names of English counties. The children yawn. At 10:30, you're summoned to the schoolroom pantry for a glass of milk and a dry biscuit. Not a moment more, not a bite less. You're to remain separate. A presence, not a person. A walking curriculum with a hemline. Midday brings penmanship. Felix breaks a nib and blames you. Clara slants her lines with deliberate rebellion. You correct her. She cries. The lady of the house storms in, horrified that you've distressed the child. You apologise, even though you haven't raised your voice above a whisper all day. You won't believe this, but even whispering can be seen as overstepping. After lunch, you take them to the garden for fresh air. You sit on the bench beneath the yew hedge while they shriek and fight over a skipping rope. One of the gardeners eyes you cautiously, as if unsure whether to tip his hat or ignore you altogether. He settles for neither. You look away. By 4 o'clock your legs ache, your head pounds, and you've said the phrase "mind your tone" at least 15 times. You retreat to your attic room and collapse into the wobbly chair. You scribble notes for tomorrow's history lesson, the Plantagenets again. Maybe they'll remember this time, or maybe not. You begin planning a quiz, then stop halfway through. What's the point? You reach for a letter, one you've written in pieces, never sent to your friend Amelia from seminary. You imagine telling her about the cold sheets, the children's cruel games, the way Clara mimics her mother's disdain already. But the words die in your lap. What could you say that wouldn't sound like a complaint? You tuck the letter into your Bible and light your single candle. Outside, the rain returns. You hear laughter below. Boots clatter on marble, the muffled pop of champagne. A gathering in the drawing room. The same room you dusted earlier while the children took their piano lessons. Your hands still smell faintly of lemon oil. No one invited you, of course. A governess at a party. That would be social ruin for them. But you hear a snippet of conversation as someone opens a window. A gentleman's voice, low and amused. She looks like a crow, that one. Always watching, never speaking. They laugh. You don't cry. You just blow out the candle. You lie in the dark and stare at the beams overhead, each knot in the wood a silent witness. One creaks now and then as if it might cave. And you begin to disappear, just a little, a foot at a time. You were so proud to get this position, so proud of your posture, your vocabulary, your ink-perfect handwriting. But none of those things matter here. Here you are tolerated until you aren't. Here you are the most educated person in the room and the least respected. Here you are the ghost in the house. You wake again to the ceiling beam, this time with a crick in your neck and a chill behind your knees. The blanket has slipped to the floor sometime in the night. You grope for it, pull it up, and breathe into your hands before sitting upright. Another day. The morning light leaks in grey through the small window. You cross to it, rubbing at the frost clinging to the glass. Below, the gardens lie stiff and pale, the hedges frosted like day-old cake. Someone has left a wheelbarrow tipped in the corner, half full of clods. The house is already awake. You hear boots stomping 2 floors below, probably the footman with coal for the drawing-room fire. You wonder if he'll bring any to the nursery. Unlikely. The governess doesn't control coal rations. Today is your first full day alone with the children, and it begins with a wardrobe dilemma. Your usual grey wool dress is still damp from yesterday's rain. The only alternative is a black cotton one with a high collar that scratches. It makes you look even more severe, like a widow who married Latin declensions instead of a man. You sigh and button it anyway. Downstairs, breakfast for the children has already been served. Clara eats soft eggs with white toast and raspberry jam. Felix has buttered crumpets and milk. You're handed a saucer with an apple and a half-slice of brown bread, slightly stale, not even tea. Clara smirks when she sees your breakfast. Don't governesses like porridge? She asks sweetly, lips stained faintly with jam. You pretend not to hear. Today's lesson plan: French verbs and botanical sketching. You brought your own chalks for this, tucked into your case since seminary. You set up in the conservatory, where sunlight softens the glass and makes the children squint. It's warmer here, at least. You guide them through the Latin names of plants: Salvia officinalis, Bellis perennis, Mentha piperita, but Felix is bored. Clara picks up a dead leaf and asks if it's a metaphor for your career. You blink. She's 9. By midday, you retreat again to your room, but not for rest. You must prepare your weekly report for the lady of the house, a summary of lessons, behaviour, progress. You keep your handwriting steady and your tone even. Though you want to write, your daughter speaks cruelty with the grace of a duchess. Instead, you write, Clara shows increasing command of her vocabulary. Felix is spirited but responds well to structure. Lies with pretty manners. You deliver the note to the silver tray outside the morning room. As you turn to go, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the gilt mirror on the wall. The collar pinches your neck. Your face looks too old for your age, and your mouth has fallen into that small tight line, like Miss Crowthorne's had. Perhaps all governesses eventually wear the same expression, the same mask. You return to your room. For a moment you sit on the bed and imagine removing the tight collar, putting on the old pale blue gown you wore to the school dance back at Miss Parsons'. You had laughed that night. Someone had held your hand. You close your eyes, just for a second. Then, knock, knock, knock. No rest. Clara has misplaced her reading book and insists you help find it. You follow her to the nursery and crawl under furniture while she watches, arms crossed. The book is under her pillow. She laughs. You do not. Later that evening, you're summoned to the drawing room, not to sit, of course, but to explain why Felix spelled Napoleon with 2 P's. The mistress is lounging with a needlepoint hoop, sipping something pale from a crystal glass. She barely glances at you as she speaks. I expect my children to be properly educated, miss. She trails off, not out of rudeness, but genuine forgetfulness. You say your surname. She nods once, then returns to her stitching. You may go. You're dismissed like a fly away from the cream, and yet, strangely, you're relieved. It could have been worse. At least she didn't ask why Clara said you smelled like old books. Back in your room, you light the candle stub. The air feels colder tonight. You pace a little, just to keep warm, thinking about governesses in novels, those dignified heroines with roguish suitors and tragic pasts. You once imagined yourself among them. Now you know better. You boil water for tea, carefully pouring it into the cracked basin and dipping in a dusty sachet of elderflower you'd saved from your last post. A small comfort. One of the few things still yours. As the tea steeps, you reach for the volume of Moral Instruction for Young Ladies on your windowsill. The margins are filled with your old notes, back when you still believed moral instruction was the way to rise, back when you hadn't yet seen how often the immoral thrived just fine. A sound breaks your focus, a knock far down the hall, then hushed voices. You peer into the corridor. 2 maids whisper near the linen press, unaware of you. Did you hear what happened to the last governess? One asks. Miss Crowthorne. The other shrugs. Said she started talking to herself, writing poems on the schoolroom walls in chalk. The first nods. They sent her away in the rain. No references. Poor soul. You pull back into your room, close the door. Bolts aren't for governesses, but you slide the wooden chair against it anyway. As you settle beneath your blanket, your mind wanders. Would you notice if you started to unravel like that? Would anyone? Or would they simply see a governess doing what governesses do, fading into her own thoughts, drifting from one post to the next like mist on a moor? You press your palm to the cracked window and draw a tiny line in the condensation, just to prove you're still here, that you still leave marks even if they vanish by morning. Your fingers are trembling slightly, but whether it's the cold or something else you can't quite say. You drink your tea slowly, rationing the warmth, then lie back, staring at the beams again. The same beams Miss Crowthorne stared at. The same beams every governess learns by heart. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you begin again, with no one ever really seeing you. No one but the children, and not even them really. The morning brings frost and silence. You know better than to expect warmth now. Instead, you focus on small dignities, folding your shawl just so, brushing your hair into a tight coil, tying the lace collar that itches against your neck. Today, Clara has history and French dictation. Felix is meant to write a letter to his cousin. But before lessons begin, there's the matter of appearance. Yours, specifically. The lady of the house sends a note. Her maid brings it folded on a silver tray, not even inked by her own hand. Kindly ensure the governess adopts more neutral tones in her attire. The black dress is too stark and may distress the children. Muted shades are preferable. You read it twice. Then again, as if it might say something different. It doesn't. Back in your room, you hold up your dresses. Grey or black. Those are your choices. The muted shades she asks for are colours only the wealthy can afford. Moss green, soft lavender, pale dove blue. All too dear for a governess's wardrobe. You choose the grey again. It's the one with the looser sleeves, easier for hiding ink stains. Downstairs, Clara studies your dress with narrowed eyes. Mama says you wear funeral colours, she announces. Is someone dead? You glance at her. Only my pride, you think, but say nothing. You begin dictation. Napoleon crossed the Alps with an army of... But Felix is already scribbling dragons in the margins of his paper. Clara holds her pen in mid-air, watching your every move like she's trying to catch you doing something disreputable. Blinking too fast, breathing too deeply. The scrutiny never leaves. Not in the nursery, not in the hallway, not even during supper, when you eat alone in your room with a plate of pale stew and a damp roll. You miss colour, not just in your clothing, but in your life. You think of Miss Parsons' seminary again. There was a girl there, Florence, who embroidered daisies onto the cuffs of her sleeve lining, so no one could see them but her. You used to laugh about it. Now you understand it. A little secret joy. You consider sewing something too, but you don't own a needle fine enough for such work, and even if you did, you're not sure what you'd embroider. A sun? Too hopeful. A cage? Too obvious. Maybe just a thread of red, hidden beneath the hem where no one would notice, a reminder that you too once had warmth in your life. In the afternoon, the children are restless. You suggest a walk, but it's too cold. You suggest sketching. Clara declares it for babies. You settle on reading aloud. Felix chooses Gulliver's Travels, but insists on skipping the boring parts. Clara interrupts every 3 pages to ask why Gulliver didn't just become a governess if he was so miserable. She finds this incredibly amusing. You do not. Later you clean the slates, reorganise the inkwells, and smooth the corners of their exercise books. You could leave it all in chaos, but you can't help yourself. Control is all you have. A neat desk, a tidy bookshelf, the illusion of order. Just as you finish, you hear laughter in the hallway. Not the children. Adults. You peer out and see the lady's cousin, Miss Eugenie, swanning through the corridor in a seafoam green day dress with pearl buttons and a velvet reticule. She pauses when she sees you. "Oh," she says. You nod politely. She doesn't nod back. She walks on. You close the schoolroom door quietly behind you, taking care not to let the latch click. The children have gone to the nursery for tea. You, of course, are not invited. A governess must always remember her place, present, but never included. In the solitude of your attic room, you begin mending your stockings. There's a hole near the toe that's grown too large to ignore. You stitch in silence, the thread pulling taut like a violin string, sharp and unforgiving. You've learned to make your few belongings last, because replacements come at a cost, and your salary is spoken for before it arrives. A quarter goes to your lodging agency. Another quarter is set aside for emergencies. That leaves little for anything beyond starch, soap, and stamps you never use. The wardrobe creaks as you open it. A single petticoat hangs limp beside the grey and black dresses. You run your fingers over the fabric. It's the dullness that gets to you. Not just the colour, but the intention behind it. Everything you wear is designed to erase you. There's a reason governesses in portraits are always painted in shadow. No ribbons, no rouge, no patterns that might suggest a sense of joy. You're meant to look respectable, but not too refined. Modest, but not matronly. Attractive enough to suggest intelligence, but never desire. You remember a governess at your seminary who wore a pale green brooch to a school inspection. A leaf made of glass. Delicate, almost luminous. The inspector told her it was inappropriate. She was asked to remove it. That same week, she was dismissed for being too visible. Too visible. It echoes in your mind. That's what this life demands. Not skill, not grace, not education or empathy or endurance. Just invisibility. You wonder if the children notice how little you own. They must. Clara notices everything. Perhaps that's why she asked whether governesses ever get married. As if marriage is a prize you forfeited long ago. She said it like an insult, but she couldn't know the weight of it. You used to dream of love, not in the torrid way of novels, but the quiet kind. A hand reaching for yours at supper, a voice that says your name like it matters. Now, when someone says your name, it's usually followed by an instruction. Miss, fetch the primer, or Miss, mind the ink, or simply Miss, as though your full identity is too troublesome to remember. You fold your stockings and place them beside your shoes. The soles are thinning. You'll need to line them with newspaper soon, just as Miss Crowthorne once did. You used to think her shabby. Now you understand her frugality was a form of defiance, quiet rebellion. You light your candle early tonight, not out of luxury, but because the sky's already dark at 4:30. Outside, the mist thickens into something heavier. Perhaps fog, perhaps just your imagination. You sit by the window and stare down at the hedge maze. You've never walked it. Governesses don't stroll the grounds unless accompanied, but still, you trace its shape with your eyes. In the centre, there's a stone bench. The children once mentioned it. Clara said it was where lovers used to meet before the war. Felix said it smelled like worms. You wonder what it smells like now. Later, you write in your journal. Just a few lines. Today, I was spoken to 4 times. Once for a mistake that wasn't mine. Once for something forgotten. Twice in passing. You stop there. You want to write more, but there's no space between the lines that doesn't ache. The children arrive 10 minutes late to the schoolroom. Clara has powdered sugar on her sleeves and Felix is dragging a wooden sword. You take a breath, straighten your posture, and greet them as if they haven't just burst in like tiny conquerors. Today's lesson is obedience, or at least it should be. You begin with scripture, reading from Proverbs about wisdom and discipline. Clara yawns theatrically. Felix draws horns on his copybook angel. You press on, even as your voice goes hoarse. It's not the disobedience that stings, it's how well they've learned it from above. After all, they're simply mirroring the rules of the house. You say, let's try penmanship. They hear, time to test boundaries. Felix knocks over the inkwell. Clara claims you brushed her hair too hard the day before. You didn't. She hadn't brushed it at all, and the tangles were like wire. Still, the lady of the house appears at the door within 10 minutes. Her dress smells faintly of violets. She doesn't ask you what happened. She crouches beside Clara, strokes her hair, and gives you a look as if you've just shouted obscenities instead of quietly reciting from Pilgrim's Progress. Perhaps Miss should reconsider her tone, she says. Children are sensitive. You lower your eyes and murmur an apology. Again. This is the 3rd this week. You wonder if governesses in France are treated this way. Probably. Maybe worse. Felix is now duelling with a curtain rod. You confiscate it. He sulks for the remainder of the lesson and refuses to conjugate a single verb. By midday, you're exhausted. Not physically, but in that deep, grinding way that settles behind the eyes. You sit on the schoolroom window ledge while the children eat luncheon downstairs. You aren't hungry, and besides, the maid has forgotten your tray again. You imagine what would happen if you simply walked out the door, packed your valise, left your reference letter, and took the next coach anywhere. You could become a seamstress, or perhaps a companion to a blind widow who doesn't require Latin declensions and needlepoint. But then you remember, the agency still holds part of your wages in trust. Leave without notice, and you forfeit it entirely. Your gloves are wearing thin. You can't afford defiance. After lunch, the children return in higher spirits. Clara plays scales on the pianoforte, slamming the keys with more gusto than grace. Felix draws moustaches on all the monarchs in his history book. You try to guide their hands, their minds, their moods. But children, like the English weather, do not answer to governesses. By mid-afternoon, Clara asks if she may write her own story instead of copying passages. You agree, grateful for the initiative. She returns 20 minutes later with a tale about a governess who turns into a beetle and is swept away with a broom. Felix laughs so hard he spills ink on the carpet. You confiscate the story, your fingers trembling slightly. Clara shrugs. It's just pretend. You manage a smile. Yes, you say. Pretend. But your hands are cold, and the story is not pretend enough. You place Clara's story in the drawer of the schoolroom desk and close it gently, as though it might leap out and sting you. In another life you would admire her wit. In this one, you're the insect in her tail, crushed between two social classes and swept away when convenient. Afternoon lessons drift into chaos. Felix refuses arithmetic entirely. Clara only half listens to your French dictation, making deliberate mistakes and then laughing at them. You correct her with patience you don't feel, your voice soft but clipped. Every so often you glance at the door, half expecting the mistress to barge in again, ready to interpret your composure as harshness. When the children finally go to tea, you linger behind to tidy the schoolroom. You blot the spilled ink, straighten the maps, stack the readers. It's your own ritual of survival, order imposed on a world that erases you. The smell of iron gall ink clings to your hands even after scrubbing. You climb the back staircase to your attic room. The steps are narrow, each one worn in the middle from decades of quiet footsteps. You wonder how many governesses have climbed them before you, each carrying the same weight of unspoken grievances. Your dinner tray waits by the door, a small bowl of barley soup, a crust of bread, and weak tea. No napkin tonight. You eat on your lap, staring at the peeling wallpaper, where a faint outline of a flower pattern still shows. Maybe roses, maybe just damp. Afterwards you light your candle and pull out the unsent letters again. There are 3 now, all addressed to Amelia but never posted. The paper is cheap and thin. You read the last one aloud in a whisper, just to hear a human voice in the room. My dear Amelia, today. Clara wrote a story about a governess who turns into a beetle. Perhaps it is not far off. Your friend, you don't finish the signature. You fold the letter and slip it under your pillow. Outside, the estate is settling into evening. Through the cracked window, you can smell coal smoke from the main chimney, mixed with the damp scent of turned earth. The kitchen bells ring somewhere below, a distant chime marking hours you don't control. You think of other governesses you've met at hiring fairs, pale women with nervous smiles and worn gloves, standing under leaky roofs while agents measured their posture like horse traders. Some had taught for 10 years, some for 20, and still they stood there, waiting for another post. A life measured in trunks and references. You imagine yourself among them in a few years, your own gloves patched, your references yellowing. You hope you'll still recognise yourself in the mirror. You're not sure you will. You draw the curtain, crawl into the narrow bed, and pull the blanket to your chin. From the nursery below comes the faint sound of a music box, the tune bending slightly, off-key from overwinding. It's one of Clara's favourites, a piece imported from Vienna. You catch yourself humming along before stopping. The candle burns lower, shadows ripple across the slanted ceiling like ink in water. You close your eyes and breathe. Tomorrow the lessons will begin again. Tomorrow you'll tie the same collar, smooth the same hair, speak the same gentle words, and maybe tomorrow Clara will write a different story, or maybe you will. It starts, as it often does, with the clink of a teacup that wasn't meant for you. You're walking down the corridor with a rolled map of the British Empire under your arm when you pass the morning room. The door is ajar. Inside, the mistress sits with her visiting sister, sipping Darjeeling from porcelain so fine you can almost see through it. They're speaking in low tones, but not low enough. "She looks so serious," says the sister, as if she's never laughed in her life. The mistress dabs her lip delicately with a monogram napkin. Governesses should not be cheerful. That's the problem with Miss... What's her name again? You pause, not out of curiosity, but because the name they're groping for is yours. A beat. Then the sister says it wrong. You move on before they notice you, your face blank, your shoulders just stiff enough to betray that, yes, you heard. Back in the schoolroom, Clara is waiting with her arms crossed and a single glove off. She wants to know why her embroidery thread hasn't arrived. It's not part of the curriculum, you explain gently. She pouts. Mother says governesses used to teach needlework. Are you too modern? You smile in a way that means do not push me. But of course she does. She also says you stare at Papa. Your hand stills over the attendance ledger. Clara's eyes gleam. I don't, you say, voice neutral. She shrugs. That's not what she said. You look at Felix, but he's too busy spinning his inkwell on the edge of the table like a roulette wheel. It tips and falls with a thunk, but mercifully doesn't spill. You collect your thoughts. You return to the lesson. But something's shifted, because now you're not just the governess. You're the subject of conversation, gossip, suspicion, and worst of all, you're visible. You spend the rest of the morning carefully folding yourself back into invisibility. You speak more softly. You sit further from the children during dictation. You keep your hands in your lap. When the master of the house passes the schoolroom door that afternoon, you do not lift your gaze, but you feel his presence, just for a second, a whiff of bay rum and new leather. You feel your own pulse pick up, then recede. You will not give them more to talk about. Still, when you're alone later, stacking readers, wiping chalk off the slates, your mind drifts, not toward him, but toward the cruelty of it all, that a glance can undo you, that a child's careless word can sour a household against you without proof, without context, without pause. Downstairs they have tea with jam and cream. Upstairs you have silence and a cup of water gone tepid. You return to your room and open your drawer. Inside is the small round mirror you brought from seminary. The silver's tarnished now, but it still reflects enough. You practice a smile, not for vanity but for survival. A soft, neutral expression. Neither too warm nor too cold. The kind governesses wear when being watched from across a drawing room. You will wear it tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after, until perhaps they forget your name again. That evening you dine in your room again. The tray contains a bowl of parsnip soup and a heel of yesterday's bread. No butter, not that you expected any. You eat slowly, not from desire, but because stretching the moment gives you something to do. Afterward you sit at your window, writing out the next day's lessons, British monarchs, map work, a recitation from The Tempest. You consider skipping the love scene. It might fuel more gossip. But then again, Shakespeare is always deemed appropriate, until it isn't. As you jot notes in the margin, the wind rattles the window pane. You imagine the mistress and her sister downstairs, wrapped in shawls, still sipping their tea, still speaking of you in clipped tones and unfinished thoughts. She stares at Papa. Her voice is so flat. Not quite pretty enough, is she? You don't blame them. Not entirely. You exist in a space designed to unnerve, educated but dependent, present but socially ambiguous, a woman with no man, no money, and no place at the table. You are by your very role a disruption wrapped in good posture. Earlier you overheard the kitchen maid say something to the housekeeper. Governesses always think they're better than us, until they end up in service proper. You aren't sure what stings more, that it was said, or that it might be true one day. You stare at your hands, ink-stained fingers. You scrub them nightly, but the blue remains faintly under the nails. You wonder if your hands would ever feel soft again if you stopped teaching. You tuck your lesson plan into your satchel, snuff out the candle and slip into bed. But your mind doesn't rest. You think of other governesses you've met in passing, like Miss Weatherby, who once taught 4 boys in Sussex and was dismissed when the eldest turned 15 and grew too fond of her Latin lessons. Or Miss Jones, who caught pneumonia in an attic room and was replaced before her fever broke. None of them were cruel, none of them were careless. They were simply visible at the wrong moment. Tomorrow you'll be quieter. You'll let Clara talk over you. You'll laugh, softly, at Felix's inappropriate jokes. You'll wear the grey dress again, the one with the dullest collar. You'll make yourself smaller, not because it's right, but because it's necessary. As you drift asleep, you wonder how long you can keep doing this, existing within margins so narrow they could barely hold a name. And what would happen if just once you stepped outside them? Would they send you away? Or worse, would they finally see you? The rain hasn't stopped since dawn, a dull sheet of grey that runs down the schoolroom windows like lazy ink. You arrived early to wipe the slates and straighten the chairs, acts of discipline, not duty. The children will be restless today. Rainy days always stir something feral in them. You'd planned an outdoor geometry lesson using hoops and sticks, angles measured by shadows, but that idea drowned with the garden. Instead, you're improvising. Again, Clara arrives in a foul mood, her hair slightly damp, her boots squeaking with each step. Felix follows with a slice of jam tart he wasn't supposed to bring upstairs. He eats it with defiant joy, sugar sticking to his chin. You ask them to begin reciting the kings and queens of England. Clara refuses. Felix pretends to forget every name but King Poopy Pants I. You attempt firmness, but only just. You're aware now of every word, every tone, every glance. Invisible, yes, but only until someone wants to look for fault. You assign copywork and step out to fetch more quills. As you pass the drawing room, you pause, again, not by choice but by sound. Laughter rings out, polite and practiced. The mistress is entertaining guests. You hear the clink of porcelain, the rustle of skirts, the thick pause before a joke lands. You think nothing of it, until you catch your own name. "The governess," says a low voice, unfamiliar. "What's she like?" "Oh, quiet," the mistress replies breezily. "Keeps to herself, as they should. We did have trouble with the last one, but this one's, well, she wears grey." They laugh. That's all it takes, you realise. Grey. That's what they see. Not qualifications, not years of training, not the way you handle tantrums or teach French irregulars or coax Clara through her arithmetic tears. Just grey. Just there. You return to the schoolroom colder than before. Felix has dipped his fingers in ink and pressed them against the window pane like some demented art project. Clara is quietly tearing the edge of her reader into tiny pieces and sprinkling them into the fireplace. You say nothing for a moment. Just watch. Then, calmly, you take the ink pot away and hand Felix a cloth. You sit beside Clara and ask her to explain the metaphor in the poem she was assigned. She shrugs and says, "It's about being trapped, obviously." Obviously. The clock ticks. By the time lessons end, your nerves are a wire pulled tight. The children run off for nursery tea and you remain behind, wiping chalk from your palms. You glance out the window again. A delivery cart pulls away from the house. On the gravel, a footman collects something dropped. A box of imported biscuits, perhaps, for the afternoon guests. A small indulgence, carefully guarded. You've never tasted one. It shouldn't matter, but it does. Later that evening, as the wind rattles the leaded windows and the floorboards creak with footsteps not meant for you, a maid knocks on your door. You look up, startled. No one ever comes here unless there's been a mistake or a complaint. The girl, no older than 16, stands awkwardly in the doorway holding a tea tray. Not the chipped one either. This one is polished silver, the sort they use in the morning room. On it, a small pot of proper Earl Grey, 2 shortbread biscuits, and a slice of something pale and soft. Almond sponge, you think. She doesn't meet your eye. "From the mistress," she says, not quite convincingly. You hesitate. It could be a peace offering, or it could be a test. Still, you accept it with a nod and thank her. She departs without another word. You close the door gently, set the tray down, and sit. For a moment, you simply look at it. The sponge cake is perfect. Neatly sliced, no crumbs, a sliver of apricot jam glinting between layers. You haven't had anything like this in months. Not since you left Miss Parsons and your friend Amelia smuggled a tart from the dining hall on your last day. That was lemon. This is better. You take one bite, then another. You chew slowly, not just for politeness but to delay the return to the room, the rain, the silence. The tea is hot, fragrant, not the tinny brew they usually give you. You wonder if this is kindness or strategy. Did the mistress feel guilt after the drawing room remarks, or does she simply wish to keep you pacified, pleasant and grey? Because here's the truth you've come to understand. They don't want to break you. Not entirely. A broken governess must be replaced, and that's tiresome. No, they want you subdued, quiet, grateful, smooth at the edges, just sentient enough to be useful. You sip the tea. It works. Just a little. You feel your pulse slow. Later, you return to your letters. You pull the one from under your pillow, the one with the line about Clara's story about the beetle, and add a few more words. P.S. I was brought sponge cake tonight. I'm not sure whether to eat it gratefully or worry what it means. I did both. You fold it, sigh, and place it with the others. As you prepare for bed, you notice something strange. The schoolroom door downstairs is ajar. You tiptoe down, candle in hand, curious. No one should be there. Inside, the maps have been left unrolled. The chalkboard hasn't been erased. But what catches your eye is this. Clara's copybook lies open, and in her slanting hand she's written something across the bottom margin. Governesses aren't supposed to have feelings. You stare at it. Then you close the book, gently. Back upstairs, you lie in bed, trying to decide if this is cruelty or curiosity. You think of Clara's mother, her powdered cheeks, the way she uses softness as a blade. You wonder if Clara is simply learning from the best. The candle gutters. You lie awake longer than usual, thinking of feelings you aren't supposed to have, and shortbread you weren't supposed to receive, and a line written by a child that somehow knows exactly where to strike. And still, tomorrow, you'll return to that room, you'll smile and teach. Because that's what governesses do, even when they're not supposed to feel. You wake to a thin stripe of light slanting across the floorboards, the sort of light that pretends it's spring but carries no warmth. It's Sunday, a governess's only official reprieve. No lessons, no grammar drills, no spilled ink, but not rest either. You rise slowly, dress in your neatest grey, and pin your hair just so. Sundays are for appearances. The household walks to church as a parade. Children scrubbed, the mistress in her dove-coloured bonnet, the master in his tall hat and muffler, and you trailing behind, invisible yet hyper-visible all at once. Downstairs, the butler hands you a prayer book. Not yours, just the one they keep for staff. The corners are curled, and someone's penciled boring over a verse in Psalms. You slip it into your pocket. Outside, the air is sharp. The gravel path crunches beneath your boots. Clara and Felix run ahead. The mistress calls after them, but not harshly. Her voice is soft for others to hear. At the church gate, you're reminded of your station once more. The family files into their pew. You take the side bench, alone. It's always this way. You sit back straight, face neutral, while the vicar drones about obedience and duty. His voice is smooth, trained. You try to focus on the words, but your eyes drift. Up to the high stone arches, the stained glass windows, the dust motes that drift like ghostly petals in the morning sun. You wonder if Miss Crowthorne used to sit here, if she watched these same motes and felt just as adrift. You imagine her writing poems in chalk in the schoolroom, just before the dismissal, just before the silence. After the sermon, you walk behind the family again, far enough to signal distance, close enough to be summoned if needed. Back at the household retreats to their Sunday rituals. The mistress naps with a lavender sachet, the master smokes by the hearth, Clara practices her scales, poorly, and Felix vanishes, likely to terrorise the stable cats. You return to your room. You boil water for tea and sit by the window with your old letters. Today feels heavier. Perhaps it's the sermon, or the silence, or the slow awareness that no one notices whether you smile or don't, whether you speak or don't, whether you're here or eventually gone. You take up your pencil and open your journal. This time you don't write about lessons or ink spills or overheard whispers. You write about loneliness, not the poetic kind, the real kind, the kind that creeps into your joints and settles like damp, the kind that walks beside you through corridors and sits across from you at supper. You write. It is strange to feel so surrounded and yet so entirely alone. Even the prayers today seem to skip past me, like birds avoiding the wrong branch. You stop, not because you've run out of thoughts, but because it's enough, more than enough. You fold the journal closed and sit back. From downstairs you hear laughter, muffled but real. You can almost tell who it belongs to, but no one calls your name, not even by mistake. Afternoon deepens into stillness. The house hushes, as if blanketed in velvet. You wander the corridors slowly, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. You've been cooped too long in the attic room, and the walls seem to be pressing inward. There's no rule that says you can't walk the upper halls on a Sunday, though of course there's no rule that says you can either. You pause outside the library. The door is ajar. You push it gently. Inside, dark wood shelves, the scent of old leather, a fireplace reduced to coals, and silence thick enough to wrap around you. No one is here. You drift toward the shelves, eyes scanning familiar titles, the Iliad, the Canterbury Tales, Jane Eyre, a touch ironic. Your fingers pause on a slim red volume of poetry. Tennyson. You pull it out. It feels like a borrowed heartbeat. You sink into the window seat with the book on your lap. For a moment you're no one. Not the governess, not the ghost in the grey dress. Just a woman, reading. You lose yourself in the lines. The words bloom in your mind like small rebellions. When was the last time you read for pleasure? Not aloud, not to explain or test, just for yourself. You don't know how long you sit there, but the light has shifted by the time you hear footsteps. You snap the book shut and rise quickly, too quickly. The master stands in the doorway, a letter in one hand, brow slightly raised. He doesn't look angry, just surprised. "Oh," he says. "Miss..." He doesn't finish. You clutch the book tightly. "Apologies," you murmur. "I needed air." He nods once. "Of course." A pause. Then, "That's one of my favourites too." You blink. The poetry. You nod, unsure if you should thank him or flee. "I'll leave you to it," he says, stepping aside. You walk past him, carefully. Your skirt brushes his coat. You feel the warmth of his presence as you pass. Not improper, not even close, but enough to unsettle the silence that had settled around you like dust. Back in your room, you place the book on your washstand. You didn't mean to take it, but your fingers never released it. You sit. The encounter replays in your mind again and again. He spoke to you as if you mattered. That's dangerous. Not because you'll act on it. You won't. But because of what it awakens. Some old part of you, long buried. The part that remembers being admired, spoken to, seen. You pull out your journal again and write nothing. Instead, you draw. A line, then another. A figure in grey standing beneath a stained glass window. Around her the pews are empty. Her hands are folded, her head bowed. She could be praying, or simply existing. You stare at her. She stares back. As the sun slips below the hedgerows outside, you light your candle and place the red book beneath your pillow, not to keep it, but to borrow its company for one more night. You tell yourself it's just poetry, but in truth, It's proof that once today, someone saw you and didn't look away. The Monday morning after church feels heavier than usual. You wake early, the red book still beneath your pillow, slightly creased from where your head rested on it. You press it flat again and set it atop the washstand, unsure whether to return it quietly today or wait and pretend you forgot. Downstairs, the air feels colder, as if the house itself is displeased with your borrowed poetry and wandering thoughts. You dress quickly, loop your hair into the usual tight twist and check your shoes for new wear. The soles are thinning again. You'll need to stuff them with newspaper soon. Last time, you used a page from a discarded sermon. The children are late again. While you wait in the schoolroom, you set up copywork sheets and place a fresh nib in each inkwell. Small things, predictable things, but it helps. When they finally arrive, they're subdued. Clara is quiet, but not sulking. Felix doesn't argue when you ask him to begin his sums. Something has shifted, but you don't know what. Only when the housemaid passes by and lingers just a little too long in the hallway do you understand. You've been spoken of again. More than usual. This time, not just in drawing rooms, in the servants' quarters, in whispers, at tea trays and coat hooks, because someone saw you in the library yesterday. Someone noticed you lingering too long. Someone saw the master speaking to you. Not sternly, not indifferently, but gently. Too gently. And that's all it takes. You are now a story. And stories, especially the kind that involve governesses, rarely end in your favour. You try to carry on as usual. You lecture on explorers. You correct Felix's penmanship. You ask Clara to read aloud, and she does stiffly, without her usual performative smugness, but she won't meet your eye. By mid-morning, the tension is thick enough to slice. The mistress appears without knocking, a folded letter in hand. Her mouth is drawn tight. Her gown is grey silk, not unlike your own in colour, but infinitely more expensive. "Miss," she says. You rise. "This was found in the schoolroom," she continues, holding out the paper. "Clara wrote it. I believe you should see." You unfold the page. It's a letter, addressed to no one, just practice perhaps, but the words are unmistakable. Governesses fall in love too, but they shouldn't. Your mouth goes dry. "She says she imagined it," the mistress adds coolly, "but of course, imaginations don't invent things out of nothing." You try to speak. You say, "I assure you," but she raises a hand. "I do not want a scandal in this house," she says, eyes flat. "Nor will I tolerate distraction from the children's education. You're here to serve a function, miss, not to be noticed." Not to be noticed. It rings, cold and sharp. She turns without waiting for your reply. The door clicks shut behind her. You stand there, heart pounding, letter still in hand. On the page, Clara's handwriting curls like ivy. Elegant, looping, dangerous. You fold it once, twice, then slide it into your pocket. Later, you'll burn it. But for now, you teach. Because that's what you do, even when you're being erased. You don't cry. Not because you're strong, necessarily, but because crying in this house feels like giving someone else the satisfaction. You learned that lesson during your second post, when tears led not to comfort, but to rumours of instability. "She's not quite right," they'd said. "Bit too emotional." You never forgot, so instead, you wipe the chalkboard, you polish the doorknob, you re-ink the slates, and you fold every emotion into the neat corners of your lesson plan for tomorrow, where it can't stain your reputation. That evening, the house feels like it's holding its breath. The music room is silent. The children eat in the nursery. You're not asked to join. Not that you ever were. You sit in your room with the red poetry book in your lap, spine warm from your hands. You trace the gilt lettering with your thumb, then rise slowly, slip it into your satchel and creep down the servants' stairs. You return it to the library shelf in silence, carefully slotting it between the odes and the Fairy Queen. It is not yours. Nothing in this house is. On your way back up, you pass the scullery. The maid sees you and pauses in her work. For a moment she looks at you, really looks. Then she says, "I heard you'll be gone soon." Your stomach drops. "Who told you that?" you ask, voice calm. Too calm. She shrugs, slicing into a beat with her thumb dangerously close to the blade. Things get around. You nod once, then leave before she sees your fingers clench. Upstairs, you sit at your desk and pull out a sheet of paper. Not a letter this time, a list. Black dress, rehem, gloves, patch left thumb, fare for return to agency, food for travel, dried apples, reference. You stare at that last one. Will you be given one? Will it say anything at all? Even the absence of praise carries weight in your line of work. A reference that says she was punctual is as good as a warning. You fold the paper and place it beside your journal. Later you lie awake, not with sadness, but with calculation. You have 2 weeks left in this post. Perhaps 3, if the mistress delays formal dismissal. You must not make mistakes. No emotion, no eye contact, no pauses in the hallway. You'll begin writing to agencies tomorrow, again. Back to the hiring rooms, the long benches, the eyes of the middle-aged men who glance at your birth date, then at your face and frown. At 28, you're not quite young enough to seem fresh, nor old enough to seem indispensable. You remember once hearing someone say governesses are like candles, useful, until they burn too low to light anything. As you drift into sleep, the house creaks and settles around you. Your pillow smells faintly of starch and something older. Your own dread, perhaps. Below, the master and mistress retire to their chambers, behind closed doors, separate from you by money, by rank, by silence. You wonder if they sleep well. You do not, but you do sleep, eventually, because even candles burn on, until they don't. By the following morning, the atmosphere in the schoolroom has grown brittle, like glass that's been flexed just enough to crack, but not yet shatter. Clara is on her best behaviour, which is to say, suspiciously kind. She arrives early, places her copybook squarely in the centre of her desk, and greets you with a smile that's too symmetrical to be sincere. Felix, by contrast, sulks from the start. He drags his feet, stares at the ceiling, and mutters about how everyone's being weird. You begin with geography, capital cities, trade routes, neutral, emotionless facts, mercifully sterile. But as you recite the exports of the West Indies, you can feel Clara's eyes on you, watching, measuring. She raises her hand. "Yes, Clara?" She hesitates, just enough to make it a performance. "What's the capital of being forgotten?" Felix snorts with laughter. You blink, and in that instant you realise she knows. Maybe not the whole of it, but enough. Children see more than they're given credit for, and clever ones? They see everything. The glance between adults, the strained tone, the tightening of your mouth when the mistress walks in. Clara is testing you. Not out of cruelty necessarily, but curiosity. To see if she can reach beneath the surface, to see if you'll flinch. You smile. "Melancholy," you say, without skipping a beat. Clara blinks. Felix stops giggling. You continue with the lesson. By midday, the tension has shifted. Clara no longer smirks. Felix keeps fidgeting but avoids eye contact. You suspect they've been told something. Perhaps that you're leaving. Perhaps that you're to be pitied. You hear the mistress's voice downstairs during luncheon, instructing someone to write to the agency. Her voice carries when she's irritated, even when she believes it doesn't. You eat your lunch at your desk. Today it's dry chicken and bread without butter, and flip through the children's dictation. Felix misspelled responsibility as wrong-sponsibility. You find yourself smiling briefly, then stop. You can't afford to soften now. In the afternoon, Clara hands you a folded note. "From me," she says, and quickly walks away. You wait until you're alone to open it. Inside, you're better than this house. That's all. No name, no apology, no sentiment really. But something in your chest shifts. You place the note in your satchel, next to the now permanent packing list, not because you'll keep it forever, but because someone, even briefly, said the unspeakable out loud. The rest of the day passes quietly. Clara does her copywork without complaint. Felix doesn't argue about his Latin verbs. At one point, Clara even offers you the end of her biscuit, though she does so like it's a scientific experiment. You decline politely. Later, you gather your materials as always, the lesson plan, the chalk, the reader. You tuck Clara's note deeper into your case, then close the lid with a soft click. Outside, the clouds are thinning. Just a sliver of light cuts across the stone terrace. It looks like a farewell, or a beginning. You can't quite tell which. That evening you do something reckless. Not by most standards, but for a governess in a household where even a slightly raised voice counts as insubordination, it might as well be treason. You walk into the sitting room, not the library, not the schoolroom, the sitting room. It's empty now, the fire reduced to quiet embers and a plate of orange peels left on the tray. Someone, likely the mistress, has left a velvet shawl draped across the armchair. You don't touch it. You don't sit. You simply stand there for a moment, letting the warmth touch your hands. Then you walk over to the small escritoire beneath the mirror. Inside the drawer, the ledger, the red one, the household ledger, where things are recorded not for accountability but for quiet monitoring. The cook's pantry orders, the seamstress's hours, and, yes, your name. You flip gently until you find it. There, written in a neat, sharp hand, Miss T, to be dismissed upon agency reply. Final wages to be held pending condition of schoolroom and linen. Held. Pending. You shut the ledger softly. No surprise. But still, it feels different when it's inked. Later, you sit in your room, candlelight flickering as you fold your gowns one by one. You line them carefully in your trunk using layers of newspaper to pad the hems. It's a habit by now. Packing. Repacking, leaving before you've ever truly arrived. On the inside flap of the trunk you've scratched tiny initials over time, just once per post, a private ritual. You add one more, WH, for Winmere House. Below that the others, a quiet graveyard of initials. You place your gloves on top. You'll polish your boots tomorrow, confirm train fare, and when the agency writes back you'll leave, again. You lie awake that night and listen, not to voices or footsteps, but to absence. The kind of silence that sounds like a sentence. The sort of quiet that doesn't end, but simply waits to be moved to another room. Sleep comes slowly, and just before it takes you, you wonder what your next house will be like. What stairs you'll climb, what cold breakfast you'll be served. What child will first ask, "Are you married?" You no longer answer, "Not yet." You now say, "No," with finality, the kind that leaves no window for questions. Tomorrow, you'll write your own letter, to the agency. You'll ask for somewhere quieter, perhaps fewer children, somewhere near the sea if possible. Not because you'll have time to visit it, but because you'd like to smell salt in the air when you open a window. Just once, just for yourself. Before you're packed up again like a well-worn textbook, carted off to a new shelf and asked to begin all over. You close your eyes and the house disappears, one beam at a time. The letter goes out the next morning. You write it early before the schoolroom is awake, before the agency's office even unlocks its door in London. You phrase it carefully, measured, respectful, but not meek. To whom it may concern, I will soon be in search of a new position. The present household is seeking a replacement. I have fulfilled my duties without incident and remain available until proper transition is arranged. You do not mention Clara, or the mistress, or the red ledger. You've learned by now, truth is not currency in these circles. Tone is, politeness, discretion, and a well-cut paragraph. You seal the letter with wax, not red. You've no proper seal, but a dribble of candlelight pressed with your thimble. It's enough. The maid takes it, expression unreadable. By breakfast the house feels lighter. Not because anything has changed, but because you have. The knowledge of departure settles over you like a second shawl. Protective. Necessary. The children arrive later than usual. You're not surprised. What does surprise you is Clara's demeanour. She says good morning, not with mockery, not with performance, just plainly. Felix carries the map case without being asked. He even holds the door for you. There's a hesitance to both of them now, as if your impending absence has softened the edges of their cruelty, or perhaps made them aware that you were never a fixture, never a part of the wallpaper. You were always a visitor. Today, you teach literature. You choose the Tempest, returning to it with care. Felix falls asleep halfway through, but Clara listens. You read aloud. This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine. She asks what it means. You tell her gently. It's about claiming what's been hidden, owning what others would rather ignore. She blinks, says nothing, but doesn't look away. After lunch, the children sketch maps. You take your usual spot at the desk, sharpening pencils, realigning the compass set. As you work, you feel a presence at the door. Another governess. She stands there, uncertain, one foot inside, the other still out. She's young, fresh-faced, holding a satchel like it might bite her. You know that look. You wore it once. The mistress appears behind her. "This is Miss Hargrave," she says briskly. "She'll be observing for a few days." Clara's eyes widen. Felix immediately asks if she can do accents. You rise, nod, offer a polite smile. The mistress doesn't look at you. She only speaks to the new girl. "There will be a proper handover, but please, watch closely. We value discipline here." You feel Clara's gaze turn to you, then to the newcomer. Miss Hargrave smiles nervously. You've been replaced. Not fired, not accused, simply supplanted. Politely, professionally, and with no more ceremony than a changed teacup. That's how it happens, not with a bang, but with a nod and a thank you for your time. Miss Hargrave observes your every move that afternoon, pen poised above her notebook, eyes flicking between your posture, your tone, your choice of reading material. You feel her gaze as a constant weight on your shoulder. She doesn't speak unless spoken to. Already she's learned one of the first and most enduring lessons of a governess. Silence is safer than charm. You walk her through the schedule, which slates to use, which books the children tolerate, how Clara responds best to praise wrapped in logic, not flattery, how Felix pretends to forget Latin but secretly memorizes it when no one's watching. She nods, scribbles, smiles. Too much. She'll learn. Clara is unusually quiet during dictation. She doesn't show Miss Hargrave her drawings, doesn't complain about the lighting, just does her work, lips pursed like she's holding back something biting and well-crafted. Felix, on the other hand, tests the waters. "Will the new governess let us play cricket in the corridor?" You raise an eyebrow. Miss Hargrave blinks. "I don't think that would be appropriate." Felix pouts. You see the wheels turning. He's already probing for weaknesses. When lessons end, Clara lingers. You collect the copybooks and begin to straighten the chairs, back turned. She stays silent a moment. Then, "I like the way you read the stories." You pause, turn. Her hands are behind her back. Her eyes are fixed on a crack in the floorboard. "I don't want a new governess." You say nothing for a long moment. Because what can you say? That it's not up to her? That this was inevitable? That liking someone isn't enough? Not in houses like this. Instead, you offer the only truth you can afford. "I liked teaching you, Clara." She nods, one sharp bob. Then she walks out of the schoolroom with more grace than you thought her capable of. You stand there alone, fingers still resting on the back of a child's chair, the new governess's pencil mark still echoing faintly behind your ears. You think of all the rooms you've stood in like this, all the times you've said quiet goodbyes to children who, hours earlier, tried to sabotage your lessons or mimicked your voice in the corridor. This is how it always goes. Rebellion, then regret, but only when it's safe, only when you're already half gone. You climb the attic stairs with heavier steps that evening. Your trunk is nearly full now. Just your nightdress and hairbrush left, and the little stack of unsent letters tucked between your journal pages. You light the candle, kneel beside the trunk and open the journal one last time. You write, "Today I began disappearing, not with disgrace, but with formality. I do not know which is worse." You close the book. You'll leave it behind, for the next governess, or perhaps for no one. But either way, it belongs to this house now, like everything else you gave. The morning you're meant to leave arrives with thin sunlight and a thick silence. No fanfare, no farewell. Your trunk is packed. The last items, hairbrush, nightdress, the borrowed poetry book, returned quietly the night before, are gone now, either stored or surrendered. You wear the grey wool dress with the neat hem and frayed cuffs. It looks almost respectable from a distance, and that's all anyone here has ever needed. Miss Hargrave arrives early. You offer her the key to the schoolroom cupboard and a carefully written list of where the supplies are kept. She thanks you, voice nervous but eager, and tucks the list into her satchel like a gift. She doesn't know yet that the ink bottles leak, that the map of the colonies is misprinted, that the children will use kindness as a test and cruelty as a shield. You do not warn her. Some things must be learned first-hand. Clara arrives 5 minutes late, her braid tied with a violet ribbon instead of the usual navy. A quiet rebellion, or a gift. You can't tell. Felix follows, dragging a slate and chewing on a crust of toast. You begin the lesson one last time, not out of duty, out of habit, out of stubbornness. They copy lines from The Tempest. Again, the same passage. You watch them write slowly, deliberately. Felix spells stranger as stranger. Clara pauses halfway through to glance at you. She doesn't speak. Neither do you. When the lesson ends, you nod to Miss Hargrave, collect your gloves and satchel, and walk quietly toward the door. Then you hear it. Miss, Clara's voice. You turn. She stands, clutching her copybook. I know I was... She starts, then stops. I didn't mean to. The words crumple like paper in her throat. You nod. I know. She takes a step closer. You weren't like the others. You smile. A real one. I know. It's enough. Felix mumbles something about beetles and wipes his nose on his sleeve. You walk out of the schoolroom for the last time. At the bottom of the stairs, the butler waits with your trunk. He does not offer to carry it. Of course not. He merely opens the front door. The mistress is nowhere in sight. The master, also absent. Only the sound of morning birds, the rattle of a distant cart. You step outside. The wind catches the edge of your scarf and you press it flat again. The agency's coach will arrive soon. 3 more stops, 3 more interviews, 3 more polite dismissals from houses with better options. But you'll go. You'll wait your turn. You always do. You sit on the bench at the edge of the drive, trunk beside you, hands folded atop your gloves. The gravel is damp beneath your boots, the air heavy with the scent of turned soil and faded roses. A late frost has curled the garden edges, and somewhere behind you, a clock chimes 9. The agency coach will come when it comes. You're no longer anxious about punctuality. You've stopped expecting things to arrive on time, especially kindness. As you wait, you listen to the sounds of Winmere House one last time. The muffled clatter of breakfast trays in the scullery, a door slamming upstairs, the faint strains of piano, Clara, no doubt, practising the same waltz you taught her 2 weeks ago. You wonder if she'll play it the same way for Miss Hargrave, or ruin it, just to see if the new governess flinches. You exhale slowly, the breath visible in the cold morning air. Then, a sound. Wheels on gravel. The coach pulls into view, worn and familiar. You rise, adjust your satchel, and lift your trunk by the handle. The driver does not dismount to help. He never does. He barely meets your eyes as you settle into the back seat. As the house fades behind you, you allow yourself a moment of indulgence. Not regret, but reflection. You remember the first day, the butler who didn't smile, the cracked basin in the attic room, the meal on a tray that smelled faintly of rust. You remember the children, how Felix mocked your lessons and Clara measured your presence like a threat, how the mistress never once used your full name, how your identity was gradually whittled down into polite silent service. But also, you remember the tiny kindnesses, Clara's scribbled note. The way Felix handed you that pencil without being asked. The brief warmth of the library. The line of poetry that made you feel seen, even if only once. It's not much, but it's what you carry. The coach lurches down the lane, past hedgerows and skeletal trees, past the twisted path leading to the village and onward toward the station. You pass a small cottage, chimney puffing smoke, garden beds waiting for spring. For one aching moment, you imagine what it would be like to live there, to belong somewhere, to wake to your own stove, your own tea, your own name spoken by someone who knows it by heart. But the coach doesn't stop. Of course not. It rolls on, and so do you. You open your satchel and pull out Clara's note. You're better than this house. You smooth the crease, fold it again, and tuck it into your glove. Not because you believe it, but because sometimes the memory of being told is enough to keep going. The agency office will smell of ink and mildew. The waiting room will be full of women like you, worn gloves, hopeful eyes. The questions will come in quick succession. Are you musical? Do you speak French? Have you any health complaints? Are you suitable for households with dogs? You will answer each one with practiced calm, and eventually someone will say, "We may have a placement, nothing permanent, but a temporary post by the sea." And you will say, "That sounds just fine." Because it does. The agency is located on a crooked little lane in London, nestled between a second-hand bookseller and a pawn shop that always smells faintly of boiled cabbage and regret. You know the scent well. You've been here before. The bell above the door jangles as you step inside, dragging your trunk behind you. The clerk, Miss Blevins, glances up with an expression that lands somewhere between recognition and professional boredom. "Miss T," she says, "back so soon." You nod, offering the thin smile that governs your entire profession. Not too warm, not too bleak, just enough to register humanity without suggesting hope. Miss Blevins gestures toward the bench against the wall. "Take a seat. We've 3 other ladies ahead of you." You do as you're told. The waiting room smells of damp wool, lavender sachets, and the faintest trace of despair. The other governesses don't speak. One is darning a glove. Another pretends to read Lalla Rookh. The third stares out the window with the stiff composure of someone who has just been let go and hasn't decided yet whether to cry about it. Your name is eventually called. You sit across from Miss Blevins' desk, the wood worn smooth from decades of desperation. She rifles through a stack of thin folders and produces one, creased at the corner, with your name on the tab. She reads aloud. "Winmere House. References. None offered. No formal complaint. Performance described as satisfactory but distant." She raises an eyebrow. "That last part. Was it meant as a compliment?" You don't answer. She shrugs. "Well, better than a scandal, I suppose." She flips a few pages, licking her thumb before each turn. "There is a temporary post available. A seaside home near Brighton. Widow, 2 daughters, 4 months, possibly 6. No pets, no piano." You nod. "I'll take it." She squints at you over her spectacles. "You haven't asked the salary." "I'll take it," you repeat. Miss Blevins records your name on a fresh placement slip. You sign it in the lower corner, your signature slightly shaky from the cold. She stamps it with a thud, then slides a few coins across the desk. Travel allowance, minus the agency's percentage, minus last month's ledger fee. You pocket them without counting. Back in the street, the air is thick with coal smoke and the cries of vendors hawking chestnuts and newsprint. You walk 3 blocks before finding a bench to sit and breathe. You don't cry. You haven't in weeks. Instead, you reach into your coat pocket and retrieve the small slip of paper Clara gave you. You unfold it again. You're better than this house. You've read it a dozen times, but this time you notice something else. On the back, faint and half erased, Clara has scribbled an unfinished sentence. "Maybe one day I'll..." And that's it. It trails off. You imagine her looking over her shoulder, writing in haste, afraid the mistress would see. You smile, not because it's comforting, but because it's honest. Later, at the rail station, you sit on a bench with your trunk at your feet and the sea-scented wind in your face. You've no illusions. The widow may be cold, the children may bite, the attic room may be smaller than the last, but the sea is real, and that for now is enough. The train to Brighton rocks gently along the tracks, its rhythm steady and strangely soothing. You sit beside your trunk in the second-class carriage, wrapped in your heaviest shawl, watching the landscape blur past in tones of brown and grey. Fallow fields, bleached hedgerows, the occasional startled pheasant flapping into the cold air. Across from you, an elderly gentleman sleeps with his mouth open and a copy of the Times folded neatly in his lap. No one speaks. It's the sort of silence peculiar to English trains, polite, dense and absolute. You lean your head against the window and allow your thoughts to drift. Windermere is already receding, not just in miles but in memory. The sting is duller now, softened by distance and the promise of sea air. Clara's note still rests in your satchel, folded between pages of your journal like a pressed flower, fragile but strangely resilient. You think of Miss Hargrave, young, eager, unprepared. She'll learn. Or she won't. Either way, the house will go on. The mistress will continue hosting her teas. The master will continue reading The Spectator. Felix will still lick his fingers before touching the Globe. And Clara? She'll write more half-finished thoughts in the margins of her copybooks, looking for someone who notices. It won't be you. Not anymore. You exhale, the window fogging just slightly. The train slows as it approaches a smaller station. Outside, fishermen haul crates toward wagons and gulls circle overhead like ragged ghosts. You catch the faintest scent of salt in the air, bracing, clean, unfamiliar. Your new employer is to meet you at the station, Mrs. Hawthorne, a widow with daughters aged 10 and 12. The agency notes described her as stern, orderly, fond of discipline. You've known worse. Fondness isn't required, only clarity. The train exhales as it stops. You step down with your trunk and scan the platform. A woman in a black bonnet and practical boots waits near the gate, arms folded, eyes sharp. She looks you over without smiling. "You're Miss T?" You nod. She inclines her head once. "We'll walk. The girls are at their music lesson." And just like that, your new life begins. Not with welcome, but with command. You follow her down a narrow street where the houses lean like old soldiers against the wind. The sea appears between rooftops, pale green, edged with foam, moving with a power that doesn't care who watches. Mrs. Hawthorne speaks only once as you walk. "You'll find us orderly, but not indulgent. My late husband preferred a structured household. I do as well. I hope you've no romantic notions of governessing. There's little room for sentiment." You almost laugh. Almost. "No, Mum," you say. "I prefer order." And you do. Order is armour. Order is shelter. And inside it, you can carry your invisible self with dignity. That night, your new room is clean but spare. A bed, a chair, a table. No fire, but a thicker quilt than the last. You unpack your things slowly, place Clara's note in the drawer, and sit beside the small window overlooking the dark sea. You can't see it now, but you can hear it. Endless, restless, free. You sit quietly, just listening. Because sometimes that's enough. Sometimes hearing the sea is the closest thing to being heard. 2 weeks into your new post, you find yourself in a market square on a rare morning off, standing before a wooden board tacked with notices. One, written in a bold, curling hand, catches your eye. Governess's Registry Office, seeking placement for experienced candidates. Apply in person. No children permitted in waiting room. Your first instinct is to look away. You already have a post. You're not seeking one. But the phrase tugs at something in you. Experienced candidates. You've never thought of yourself as seasoned exactly. Just enduring. You walk on, clutching your market basket, listening to the squeak of your shoes against the cobbles. The sea air here is sharper than in London, the gulls louder. The butcher wraps your meat in old newsprint. The woman at the baker's stall calls you miss without blinking. No one here knows your story, and that, for now, is a mercy. The Hawthorne girls are, thankfully, manageable. Not docile, not sweet, but manageable. Marion, the elder, recites her multiplication tables as if preparing for war. Lillian asks questions with a surgeon's precision, each one meant to slice into your logic. But they are not cruel, and that too is a kind of luxury. Mrs. Hawthorne keeps to herself. She inspects your ledgers weekly, expects punctuality, and dislikes humming. But she does not question your every move. She leaves you alone, which in your world might as well be affection. Your attic room is small but dry. The bedding doesn't smell of mildew. The curtains, though thin, are clean. And in the mornings, when the sun peeks over the sea, it casts a soft gold light across the floorboards that almost makes you believe in peace. Almost. Still, even here, the ghosts of former posts trail after you like loose threads. You catch yourself pouring tea too quietly. You avoid calling the girls dear, though you sometimes want to. You iron your cuffs compulsively. One evening, as the girls copy spelling lists, you catch Marion glancing at your hands. "They look sad," she says suddenly. You blink. "My hands?" She nods, like they're always waiting. You look down. Ink-stained fingers, a faint red line where your gloves press, a small scar near your thumb from a broken teacup last spring. You hide them in your lap. The girls return to their writing. Later that night, you write to the agency. Not for a new post, but for a copy of your own file. You want to know what they've written, what version of you now exists in their drawers. 2 days later, the letter arrives. A single folded page. You read it twice. Efficient, quiet, capable, tends toward emotional detachment. You trace the words with your thumb. Efficient, quiet, capable. And then, that last line. You suppose they mean it as a flaw, but in your world, it's survival. Emotional detachment isn't the absence of feeling, it's the art of not drowning in it. You refold the letter and place it in the back of your journal. You don't cry. You simply go downstairs, boil water for tea, and prepare tomorrow's lesson on the explorers of the South Seas. Because if there's one thing you've learned, it's this. To survive as a governess is to master the art of navigation, even when the maps are wrong. Later that week, you find yourself seated on a bench just above the shoreline, journal in hand, though you haven't written a word in 20 minutes. The sea is out today, pulled back like a breath being held, leaving behind glistening flats and the slow shimmer of sunlight on wet stone. You breathe it in, the salt, the wind, the faint metallic tang that seems to cling to every rock and nail and window pane in this coastal town. Behind you, a small cluster of schoolchildren pass, laughing. One of them points to your journal and says something you can't quite hear. It doesn't matter. You're used to being pointed at, whispered about, not always out of malice, sometimes just confusion. A woman alone is always a subject of curiosity, especially one in grey. You run your fingers across the page of your journal. The paper is coarse, the ink cheap. You consider writing about the market stall that smelled of anise and fish, or the woman who sold dried lavender wrapped in scraps of lace. But instead, you write just 3 words, still not seen. Then you stop. You think of the children you've taught over the years. Clara with her clever spite and half-finished thoughts. Felix always pretending not to care. The unnamed girls at your earlier posts, each one either too quiet or too watchful. You wonder how many of them remember you. Probably none. You're not meant to be remembered. Governesses are the parentheses in a family's life, the pause, the bracketed note, the half-spoken sentence quickly overwritten by time. Back at the Hawthorne house, the girls are waiting with their readers and slates. You've planned a lesson on natural history, something about tide pools to match the landscape. But before you begin, Marion asks, unprompted, "Did you always want to teach?" You hesitate. It's not a question children usually ask. Not ones like her, anyway. Sharp, observant, with a voice that leaves no space for evasion. "No," you say truthfully. She nods. Lillian looks up from her copybook. What did you want to do then? You think for a moment. The answer floats up from some long-lost corner. Read, you say, all the time. They consider this. Then Marion says, "That's boring." Lillian adds, "I think it's lovely." You smile, quietly amused at how often truth lives in contradiction. After the lesson, the girls are dismissed. You remain behind to tidy the schoolroom, replacing chalk, closing books, smoothing the folds in the map of the British Isles. And there, on your desk, you find a page torn from a copybook. On it, a crude sketch of you, small, stiff, with a bun and a pencil in hand. Beneath it, Marion has written, "Miss T likes oceans and poems and being alone, but not always." You stare at it for a long time, then you fold it and place it in the pocket of your dress. As you wash your hands later, you notice your reflection in the wash basin mirror, warped but honest. The same eyes, the same thin mouth, but something softer around the edges, something like being seen. It begins innocently enough, at least as these things often do. One morning in April, as you're preparing the girls' spelling lesson, you hear Mrs. Hawthorne speaking with someone in the foyer. Her voice is lower than usual, tinged with amusement. You're not meant to listen, of course, but it travels up the stairwell like scent from the kitchen. No, not the housekeeper, the governess. She's very reserved, very correct. A man's voice replies. You don't catch the words, only the tone, polished, clipped, the sort that belongs to a younger son of a landowning family, or someone pretending to be one. You return to the schoolroom and continue setting out slates. The interaction should mean nothing. A visitor passing through. It happens. But you can't help noticing the way Mrs. Hawthorne's voice tightens whenever she says your name now, or how she now reviews your lesson plans with faint suspicion, as if checking for hidden messages. And then, 2 days later, the visitor appears again. This time, you see him. You're returning from the garden with the girls, your arms full of notebooks and a damp hem from the morning dew, when you step into the hall and find him by the coat rack. He's just hanging up his gloves. Tall, fair, a walking stick with a silver wolf's head handle. He glances at you, and here is where it happens. He smiles. Not the kind reserved for servants or children or women who don't matter, but the kind given to equals. You nod. Reserved. Correct. Just like Mrs. Hawthorne described. But he holds your gaze 1 second too long. Later, at supper, Marion mentions it. Casually, between bites of bread. "Mr. Lewis said you had a scholar's face." You look up from your tea. Mrs. Hawthorne's spoon stills in her hand. "I beg your pardon," she says. Marion shrugs. That's what he said. A face that reads books before speaking. Lillian adds, "He asked how long you'd been here." You say nothing, because there is nothing to say, and yet the air shifts. Mrs. Hawthorne sets her spoon down, her lips pressed together in that genteel way that signals far more than words ever could. After the children are dismissed, she asks to speak with you privately. In the sitting room she doesn't sit. She stands near the window watching the sea beyond the hedge. "I've had good order in this house, Miss T. I've maintained it carefully. You understand what that requires." "Yes, ma'am," you say softly. She turns. "Good. Then I trust you'll maintain that order." You bow your head, not in agreement, but because it's what's required. Later, as you prepare the next day's copywork, your hands tremble just slightly. Not because of Mr. Lewis, but because of the power of a glance, a smile, a word repeated by a child. You had been careful, you had kept your head down, and still it found you. Not affection, not desire, just the idea of it, and that's always been enough to undo women like you. You do everything right after that. You avoid the drawing room when guests arrive. You take the long way around the house rather than cross the foyer. You rehearse neutrality like a pianist practices scales, again and again until your tone has no shape and your expression becomes as unreadable as stone. And still, it doesn't matter. 3 days later, Mrs. Hawthorne requests a brief word after supper. You follow her into the study, hands folded so tightly your knuckles pale. She closes the door softly. "I've received word from the agency," she says. "They've found someone more local, a governess from Hove. Very qualified." You nod slowly. "This is no reflection on your abilities," she adds, as though reading from a script. "We are simply refining the structure of the household." Refining. You want to laugh, but you don't. You ask evenly, "When would you like me to go?" Mrs. Hawthorne clasps her hands behind her back and gazes out the dark window. "A week should suffice," you nod again. "I'll have the room in order." She exhales, clearly relieved that you aren't crying, pleading, or raising your voice. She doesn't thank you, just steps aside so you may leave. You pack slowly that evening, folding each garment as though you're smoothing the record of your existence here. The girls are told nothing, but children always know. The next morning, Marion stares at you during dictation like she's trying to memorize something. Lillian asks, "Do governesses ever retire?" You smile gently. "Some do." You don't say how. You don't say where. That night, as you bring in the spelling books from the garden, Mr. Lewis appears again. He tips his hat. You bow your head and walk straight past. You don't speak. You don't look. Because you are not a fool. And because you now understand something new and cruel about your position. It's not that you aren't allowed love. It's that you are punished for being capable of it. Even if you never act on it. Even if you never return a smile. Even if all you do is exist in a way that might tempt someone to glance too long. You are careful. You are invisible. And still, you are visible enough to be removed. Your last night, Marion leaves something folded under your Latin reader. You find it just before bed. A drawing, simple but deliberate. It's a lighthouse, shining across rough water. Underneath she's written, "Some people notice things, even when others pretend not to." You stare at it, then fold it and place it beside Clara's note. Your collection grows, not in wages, not in dresses, but in paper. Tiny proofs that you were here, that someone once saw you. Even if the world preferred you weren't, your next position takes you inland, far from the sea, far from the salt-thick winds and the whisper of waves outside your attic window. This time, it's a townhouse. Red brick, ivy-covered, 3 stories high, tucked between a solicitor's office and a tailor's shop. No garden, no view. The street is narrow and paved with uneven stones that catch the edges of your boots. The family is called Elwood. Dr. Elwood is a physician, gone most days and nights. Mrs. Elwood is pale and watchful, like someone who once lived loudly and now folds herself into small corners of the house. Their child, only one, is a boy named Henry, 6 years old, delicate, solemn, and oddly formal, like a child raised by furniture. He does not misbehave. He does not laugh. He simply exists, like a quiet habit the house formed and never broke. Your room is on the top floor again. You no longer flinch at attic spaces. The wallpaper is yellowed and the floor slopes gently toward the far wall. But there's a bookshelf and a small rug, and the window opens without protest. It's enough. You settle in quickly. The lessons are simple. Alphabet drills, nature studies, poetry recitations. Henry obeys without question, though you begin to suspect that isn't a sign of understanding. He repeats facts the way an echo does, faithfully, but without grasp. Still, he sits still. He listens. He completes his sums. You've had worse. What unsettles you most is the silence, not just from the child, but from the house itself. There are no dinner parties, no drawing room laughter, no footsteps beyond what's necessary. You see Mrs. Elwood in passing. She nods politely, says little. Sometimes she watches you over the banister as you escort Henry to lessons, her hands gripping the rail like she's steadying herself on a ship in high seas. On your 4th day, she speaks, not to correct you, not to praise, simply to ask, "Do you find him strange?" You blink. "Pardon, ma'am." "Henry," she says softly. "He doesn't seem like other children, does he?" You hesitate. "I think he's very observant," you offer carefully. She exhales, and for a moment you think she might say something real. But then she closes herself back up, nods, and disappears into her sitting room like mist under a door. You're left standing on the landing, Henry's hand in yours, unsure who in this house is meant to be cared for and who is meant to do the caring. That night you write in your journal, "The child watches everything. The mother watches nothing. The father is a myth." You draw a small sketch of a caged bird beneath it, not to be clever, just because the page looked too blank. The days at the Elwood house stack like library volumes, neatly aligned, dustless, untouched by anything resembling joy. Henry arrives promptly each morning. You nod. He nods. You begin. He recites. You correct. He blinks. Then you begin again. You try poetry to stir something. Blake, Tennyson, Christina Rossetti. Nothing lands. Even the rhyme in Goblin Market barely makes him look up. You assign him lines to copy. Better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. He copies it mechanically, the quill scratching like a clock tick. You wonder if he understands sadness, or if he simply catalogues it like the insects pinned in the specimen drawer Dr. Elwood keeps in his study. That evening you descend to the parlour to request more slate pencils. The door is ajar. You overhear Mrs. Elwood speaking with the housemaid, not in anger, but with a weariness that makes your stomach knot. She doesn't cause trouble, the mistress says, but she's so still, like she's already faded. You realise slowly they're not speaking about the boy, they're speaking about you, and that's when it hits you. You have somehow become indistinct, not through failure, but through success. You've been so proper, so quiet, so relentlessly functional, that you've become part of the wallpaper. You remember the agency's file, tends toward emotional detachment, and here, in this silent house, that trait has made you perfect. You are the absence that holds the room together. That night, you receive a letter from Miss Parsons' seminary. Someone there still remembers you. A former pupil, now a mistress of a girls' academy, has written to request a recommendation for a new governess. They want to know if you're still in service, still available, still suitable. You fold the letter slowly and place it on the windowsill. The candlelight catches the edge of it, casting a long shadow across your trunk. You sit with it, and you realise you could go there. You could teach older girls, lecture, write, be seen. But what unnerves you is that part of you hesitates. You have become good at this ghost work, this folding of yourself into corners, this quiet mastery of survival. There's comfort in being overlooked. There's safety in detachment. But there's also loss. You look at the sketch Marion drew, the lighthouse in the storm, and think, would I still shine if no one ever came near again? You place the letter beneath your journal. Not a refusal, but not an answer either. Tomorrow you'll teach Henry about beetles. He will listen. He will not ask why they curl into themselves when touched. But you'll tell him anyway, because sometimes the question is implied, and sometimes the answer is more for you than for them. The beetles arrive in a small wooden box, ordered from a scientific supplier by Dr. Elwood at your request. You hadn't expected him to agree, had barely expected a reply to your note, but the box appears on the schoolroom desk 3 days later, without comment, sealed with a green wax stamp. Inside, 6 pinned specimens, labelled in neat copper plate. Cetonia orata, Carabus nemoralis, Silpha atrata, each mounted on cork, stiff-legged and gleaming. Henry stares at them as if they've arrived from another planet. You place the box on the table between you. These are scavengers, you explain gently, but also necessary. They clean what others leave behind. He leans closer. Do they bite? No, you say. They hide. He nods once, then says nothing else for the rest of the morning. But later, during handwriting practice, he draws one in the margin, a little iridescent blur with crooked legs and a proud curve to its shell. You don't comment, you just let it live there. That evening, as you record the day's work in the schoolroom log, you pause midway through a sentence. Henry showed unusual engagement with, you don't finish it. Instead, you close the book and step outside. The Elwoods townhouse doesn't have a garden, only a slim brick courtyard shadowed by the kitchen wall. But tonight, you sit on the single bench there and listen to the drip of rain from the eaves, watching the lamplight catch in puddles. There's no wind, no sea, no children's laughter, just the slow ticking of time. You remember something then, something small and ridiculous. The first time you ever taught a child to spell the word window, she was 6. Her name was Alice. You traced each letter on her palm and she'd laughed like it was a spell. You hadn't thought of her in years. You wonder where she is now. You wonder if she remembers you. Maybe she spelled window on someone else's hand years later and thought vaguely of the governess who taught her. Or maybe she forgot you entirely the moment you left. That is the way of it. Your life is lived in other people's prefaces, never in their chapters. You return inside, the hem of your dress damp. You dry it by the fire in the schoolroom, toes curled near the hearth like a child stealing heat. Upstairs, the house is still. No laughter, no arguments. Just layers of silence, folded over each other like linens in a drawer. You feel the absence of everything all at once. Affection, belonging. A voice saying your name like it matters. But you do not despair. Not anymore. Now, you simply endure. Like a beetle under bark. Still, unseen, necessary. The next morning, Henry doesn't arrive for his lesson. You wait for 10 minutes, then 15. Eventually, the housemaid knocks on the schoolroom door with her cap askew and cheeks flushed from climbing too many stairs. "Master Henry's taken poorly," she says. "Mrs. Elwood says there'll be no lessons today." You nod. "Is it serious?" The maid shrugs. "A fever, they say. The doctor's been sent for. She's sitting with him now." You thank her and return to your desk, but you don't sit. Instead, you wander the schoolroom, touching the edges of things you rarely notice. The rim of the globe, the worn corner of the window frame, the place on the bookshelf where a copy of Grimm's fairy tales has gone missing since your arrival. The room feels suddenly weightless, like furniture set adrift. You keep glancing at the door, half expecting the boy to slip in, silent as ever, slate under arm, the scent of starch and ink trailing behind. He does not. That afternoon, Mrs. Elwood appears for the first time in days. You're in the hallway, returning from the kitchen with a basin of hot water, when you nearly walk straight into her. She's pale, not delicately, not fashionably, truly pale, as though the light has drained from her. "He asked for you," she says. You blink. "Henry?" She nods once. Her hands are trembling just slightly. He wouldn't say what for, just, "Miss T, the one who knows beetles." Your chest tightens unexpectedly. You set the basin aside and follow her up the staircase. Henry lies in bed, a small, still shape beneath a heavy wool blanket. His face is flushed, lips dry. His eyes flick open when you enter. He does not speak, but his fingers curl toward yours. You sit beside the bed and take his hand gently. It's warm, too warm. A fever that hums just beneath the skin. You speak quietly about the beetles, about the tide pools you once saw near Brighton, about the kinds of shells that spiral perfectly but house nothing. You don't know if he's listening, but he doesn't let go. Mrs. Elwood watches from the doorway, silent. Eventually the doctor arrives. You're dismissed without ceremony, like a visiting ghost who stayed longer than permitted. Back in your attic room, you sit on the edge of the bed, still holding Henry's warmth in your hand like a smuggled coal. You think of all the children whose hands you've never held, not from indifference, but from rules, from distance, from lines too sharply drawn between kindness and impropriety. You remember a governess once dismissed for comforting a child during a thunderstorm, just held her until the rain passed. The agency note read, "Too familiar with the charges." And yet, you also remember children who wept and no one held them. You lie back, staring at the ceiling, thinking, how strange it is that the most human acts become scandal when a governess performs them. You close your eyes, and for once, you don't picture another job or another house or another thin mattress in another narrow room. You just picture Henry's small, hot hand in yours, proof that you were real, even if only for a moment. A week later, you sit once again in the agency office. The same green walls, the same damp smell of ink and coal, the same chair that tilts ever so slightly to the left. Miss Blevins doesn't look up immediately. Her desk is even more cluttered than usual. Slips of paper, an open tin of mints, a small bowl of straight pins, a stack of unopened letters tied with twine. You recognise the atmosphere of backlog and mild chaos. She finally notices you and lets out a sigh, half amusement, half resignation. "Miss T, I see." You offer the same calm nod you've given every other time. You're not surprised to be here. Not really. Henry recovered, but slowly, and in the haze that followed, medications, sleepless nights, too many visitors, something shifted. Mrs. Elwood became even more pale, even more brittle. You weren't dismissed this time. You were released. That was the word she used. You've done well, but the household is looking to consolidate. Henry will be tutored by a cousin. Thank you for your service. Plight final. Miss Blevins begins flipping through your file. Lasted longer this time, she mutters. You choose not to respond. She pulls a fresh placement slip from her drawer. Something new came in this morning. Rural, Lancashire, small estate, 3 boys, vicar's family, salaries modest, but they offer board and coal allowance. You nod. I'll take it. You always say that, she says, not unkindly. She fills in the form with a heavy fountain pen, her hand blotting slightly on the Q in qualified. You know, she says as she writes, I've worked here for 23 years. You see patterns. Some girls come in bright-eyed, collapse after the first post, marry a farmer or disappear entirely. Some get lucky, fall into a wealthy family with poor boundaries. Others crack like dropped china. She looks up, her eyes sharp now. And then there's you. You meet her gaze. What am I? Miss Blevins sets down her pen. Unbreakable? The word lands awkwardly. Not as a compliment, but as an assessment. A category. You say nothing. She hands you the slip. Coach leaves Thursday morning. Estate is called Netherby Cross. Dress warm. It's colder up there. You rise, thank her, and exit without ceremony. The fog is thick in the London streets, and you pull your shawl tighter. A boy hawks matches near the curb. A woman sells roasted chestnuts with fingers blackened by soot. You pass a bookshop and pause. In the window, Jane Eyre, a new edition. Blue cover, gold lettering, priced far above what you could spare. You've never liked that book. Not because of the writing, because of the lie. Reader, she married him? No governess you've ever known did. You walk on. That evening you return to your boarding room, temporary as always, and place your trunk near the foot of the bed. You run a hand along the brass latch, feeling the grooves where labels have peeled, handles worn smooth by departure. You pull out your journal. Beneath it, the letters and fragments you've carried post after post. Clara's scrawl, Marion's lighthouse, Henry's beetle. You unfold them, set them side by side. They are your legacy. Not children raised, not fortunes earned, but tiny private proofs that you are not invisible. You are seen, even if only by those too young to say so aloud. You sleep poorly that night, not from dread, but from the quiet thrum of repetition, the motion of packing and unpacking, of entering homes through the servants' entrance and leaving through the side gate, of sitting on hard benches in agency offices, waiting for your name to be called like a parcel to be claimed. Morning brings grey skies and coal smoke curling against the rooftops. You rise early, scrub your collar, brush your boots, and polish the brass buckles on your trunk for no one in particular. The journey north to Netherby Cross takes most of the day. By the time you arrive, your dress smells of soot and damp wool. The coach drops you near a frozen hedge, with nothing but the faint flicker of chimney smoke to guide you toward the house. You find it eventually, a modest stone estate flanked by bare trees and watchful crows. No grand staircase, no polished butler, just a maid with a pinched nose who shows you up the servants' stairs without speaking a word. Your room is spare and square, with a slanted ceiling and a mattress stuffed with straw, a basin, a cracked mirror, a wooden cross nailed above the window. You unpack without thinking. First the journal, then the shawl, then the folded paper scraps tucked into your underthings like contraband. You smooth each one, line them on the windowsill. They are creased now, slightly yellowed, the ink beginning to fade, but they are still yours. The vicar's wife greets you over cold tea in the drawing room. Her smile is thin, her eyes are kind but distracted. "You'll find the boys unruly," she says, pouring without offering sugar. "Their last governess only lasted a fortnight, but I've told them you're not one to be tested." You nod. That at least is true. You meet the boys the next day. 12, 9, and 6. All ginger-haired and freckled, full of questions about beetles and ghost stories and whether governesses know how to whistle. You say yes, and do. They erupt with laughter. That afternoon, you find one of them watching you quietly as you prepare dictation. He tilts his head. "Are you lonely?" You blink. "I beg your pardon?" He shrugs. "You look like you live in your head." You smile, genuinely. "I live lots of places," you say. "My head is just the quietest." He considers this. Then, in the loud, declarative voice only children can manage, he says, "I think you're strange." And for the first time in weeks you laugh. It's brief, light, gone as quickly as it comes, but it's real. That night you return to your room, light the stub of candle and open your journal. You write a single line. "I laughed today, and no one looked frightened." You stare at it, then underline it, softly, once. It may not last. Most things don't. But in that moment, in that tiny attic with the candle flickering and the wind just beginning to howl through the cracks, you feel like a person again. Not a placeholder, not a shadow, just a woman. Strange, seen, still here. You stay at Netherby Cross longer than you expect. Longer than most governesses, certainly. The vicar's wife says nothing about it directly, but you hear it in the way she pauses when offering your wages. The boys, too, seem vaguely surprised every Monday when you reappear with fresh lessons and starch in your cuffs. Like you're a guest who never left. Like they're unsure whether to be relieved or concerned. And you don't quite relax, but you begin to unfold, just slightly. The boys, Thomas, George, and little Ben, are loud, muddy, and maddening. But they are also earnest in the way only children without servants or silver spoons can be. They don't mock your posture. They don't mimic your voice. They do ask if you're married, of course, but not cruelly, just curiously, like they're gathering data about the world. When you tell them no, they nod solemnly, as if that somehow adds to your mythos. You are, in their eyes, part teacher, part minor forest witch. You like that. On Sundays, you accompany them to the vicar's service. You sit in the fourth pew beside the boys, where Ben fidgets and George whispers questions about angels during the hymns. You answer only once, quietly, out of the corner of your mouth. No wings, just old clothes and big ideas. The boys laugh so hard they're sent to the back row. You do not apologise. On Monday mornings, you lead lessons in the small upstairs room that smells faintly of ink, dust and firewood. You've begun to draw again. Simple things at first. Maps, insects, storybook castles. The boys copy them and sometimes improve them. You find one of Ben's drawings tucked into your Latin reader. A tower on a hill, with a tiny grey figure standing at the top, cape blowing in the wind. You recognise yourself. He's written underneath, "Miss T is brave." You place it beside Clara's note and Marion's lighthouse. Another paper witness, another soft declaration. The vicar's wife still keeps her distance. She nods politely when you pass, asks about grammar and attendance, and rarely meets your eyes. But she's begun leaving things outside your door. A scone wrapped in cloth, a candle stub, a sprig of rosemary, small signs of truce, small signs of respect. Sometimes, after the boys are asleep, you take long walks around the edge of the estate. The fields roll outward like green waves. The sky hangs low, filled with rooks and smoke. You collect feathers, pressed leaves. Once, a stone with a hole in the centre. The wind is different here, thinner, cleaner, edged with peat and something almost sweet. You feel less like a stranger, and more like a fact. One grey afternoon, George asks if you've ever been in love. You're halfway through a sentence about irregular French verbs when he drops the question like a pebble into water. The other two boys go still, sensing something more serious than usual. You pause, then close the grammar book. You look out the window a moment before answering. "I've loved people," you say softly, "but I don't know if I've ever been in love." Ben, who is 6 and thinks love means giving someone your last biscuit, nods thoughtfully. George frowns. "Is that sad?" You tilt your head. "Not really," you say. "Some people chase grand love stories. Some people live quietly, loving things other people never notice." "Like beetles," says Thomas. You smile. "Exactly like beetles." The room relaxes. The moment folds itself away, tucked between pages like a pressed flower. Later that week you receive a letter from the agency. A new opportunity. London again. A wealthier family. Higher wages. 2 girls, ages 8 and 10. A promise of better prospects. You hold the letter by the fire, reading it twice. The offer is good. Very good. But when you look up, Ben is at the schoolroom door, covered in chalk and holding a drawing. It's you again. This time riding a griffin. "Do you want it?" he asks. You reach for the picture and shake your head. "No," you say gently. "I want you to keep that one." He beams, and you realise you've already decided. You write back to the agency that evening. "Thank you, but no." You remain at Netherby Cross through the end of winter, then spring, then the summer that follows. The days unfold gently. Lessons, ink-stained fingers, stories read aloud by candlelight. Sometimes you still wake in the night, heart racing, waiting for dismissal or accusation. But the dread fades more quickly now. You are, as Miss Blevins once said, unbreakable. But more than that, you are undismissed, kept, trusted, even liked. One quiet evening, you find a note tucked beneath your teacup, written in a child's scrawl. "If you leave, we'll probably turn into wolves." You laugh. A real laugh. Not the careful one, not the polite one, but a full, unguarded sound that echoes off the walls and makes the candle flicker. You place the note beside the others, the growing little archive of your quiet legacy, the lives you've entered, the small, strange miracles you've left behind. You don't notice the ache in your hands until autumn sets in. It starts as stiffness in the morning, your fingers slow to close, your knuckles reluctant to bend. You chalk it up to the weather, to age, perhaps, though you're not old, not yet. But something in you is tired, bone-deep tired. Not from the boys, they still greet you with the same lopsided grins and ink-stained hands. Not from the vicar's wife, who now leaves tea by your door on Wednesdays. Not even from the routine, which has become something close to comfort. No. The tiredness is the kind that comes from years lived without rest, without a true home, without the kind of peace that doesn't need watching over. One day, while sketching the skeleton of a kestrel for Thomas, your hand seizes. The pencil drops. The pain flashes sharp through your wrist and you swear under your breath before remembering yourself. Ben hears. "You said a word," he whispers, eyes wide. You chuckle despite the pain. A small one. Still counts. You flex your fingers slowly. The joints protest, swollen and tender. The boys begin watching you more closely after that. They fetch chalk without being asked. They copy their work twice so you won't have to correct it. They carry your satchel down the stairs without argument. You do not comment on it, but you notice. One morning, George brings you a mug of warm milk with honey. "You looked cold," he says, and then scampers off. Another evening, Thomas stands outside your door with a bowl of water and a threadbare flannel. "For your hands?" You close the door and sit on the edge of your bed. You dip your fingers into the warm bowl. Let the ache rise and soften. There's no agency slip this time, no dismissal letter, no whisper from the vicar's wife. But you know it's nearly time to go, not out of rejection, not out of failure, but because your body is asking you, gently, firmly, to stop being made of iron, to let yourself become soft, even if only for the last stretch of your story. You write a letter to Miss Blevins, not to ask for a post, just to say thank you. You don't expect a reply. You pack slowly, tenderly, each object placed with care. The beetle drawings, the griffin, the lighthouse, the ledger of small kindnesses. The children give you their goodbyes in secret ways. A feather slipped into your coat pocket, a pebble on your windowsill, a note folded in 4. We'll remember you even when we grow up and stop believing in governesses. You leave before sunrise. The house is quiet, still tucked in sleep. The only sound is the creak of the floorboards under your boots and the distant shifting of coals in the hearth downstairs. Your trunk is lighter now, not from lack, but from decisions made. You've left behind old ledgers, a cracked teacup, 2 worn dresses you no longer care for. In their place, you carry small things that matter more than value. Ben's griffin drawing, George's feather bookmark, the pressed leaf Thomas once swore was magic. You pause at the top of the stairs, looking back once, not dramatically, not sentimentally, just a final glance, the way you'd look back at a quiet room where you once sat thinking. The road is damp with last night's rain. Mist clings to the hedgerows like sleep. You walk to the station with your shawl pulled high and your shoulders wrapped against the chill. No carriage, no fanfare. You prefer it this way. At the platform, the station master nods as he sees you approach. Northbound train's running late, he mutters. Might as well sit. You nod and lower yourself onto the cold bench, your joints sighing in protest. Out of habit, you open your journal, the same one that's travelled post to post, city to village, hearth to attic. You flip past old entries. The ink is faded on some, smudged on others. But the voice is still yours. One page near the end is blank. You press your pencil to it, then pause. You're not sure what to write this time. There's no rage, no loneliness biting at your throat, just stillness. A kind of hush you haven't felt since childhood. You write, "Today, I leave not to flee, but to rest." You underline it once. No more. The train pulls in with a groan and a hiss of steam. You rise, haul your trunk aboard and settle into a window seat. Your hands ache as you grip the handle of your journal, but they ache less than yesterday, and that's enough. As the train pulls away, you watch the countryside roll past. The hills, the hedges, the flicker of a small boy in the field waving something white. You don't raise your hand to wave back, but you smile. You'll carry them all with you, as you always have. Only now, you carry yourself too. You arrive in a town that doesn't know your name. No letters have been sent ahead. No family waits at the gate. No housekeeper eyes your gloves or marks your posture against the wallpaper. It's quiet, almost unnervingly so. The inn smells of yeast and coal smoke. Your room is small but warm, with a worn coverlet and a wash basin that doesn't leak. There are 2 windows. One looks out over the rooftops, the other toward a mossy orchard where birds skip through the leaves. You sit on the edge of the bed and breathe, not out of habit but out of choice, and that in its quiet way feels revolutionary. You begin a routine, not a governess's schedule, but one of your own. You walk to the bakery in the morning. You drink strong tea, bitter with overboiled leaves. You sketch people in the square, a woman selling ribbons, a boy chasing pigeons, an old man carving something invisible into the air with his cane. You write, but only if you feel like it. And when you don't, you sit. You watch. You listen. The ache in your hands doesn't vanish, but it lessens. You learn to wrap them in warm cloth before the evening chill sets in. You find a woman in town who sells ointments made from comfrey and elderflower. She gives you a small tin and a smile. "Good for joints," she says. "Better if you believe it." You do, or at least you want to. Sometimes in the early afternoon you read books you never had time for. Not primers or histories or etiquette guides, but stories. Real ones. With dragons. With foolish girls who make wild choices. With endings that aren't always tidy, but leave you strangely satisfied. One evening, you come across a passage that reads, "She was not the sort of woman who made history, but she remembered it, and that was enough." You copy it into your journal, then underline it twice. That night, you dream of all the girls you've taught, each one growing taller, louder, stranger. Some with husbands, some with books, one running a printing press, one climbing a tree in trousers, none of them perfect, but all of them possible. And you feel, as you drift toward waking, that you might have helped make them that way. Weeks become months. The innkeeper begins to leave an extra roll on your tray without charging. The baker teaches you how to shape dough so it rises just so, and you trade her 3 feather sketches for a bag of spice. You become, slowly, gently, a fixture. Not in the way a governess anchors herself to a household, bound by rules and expectations, but in the way a tree quietly settles into the soil, roots reaching not by force but by familiarity. You're asked once by a woman in the market what you do. It surprises you. Not the question, but that you don't know the answer. You consider saying, "I taught children for 25 years," or "I lived in 47 different houses," or even, "I was once very good at surviving." Instead, you smile and say, "I rest." The woman nods like that's the most natural thing in the world. You visit a small museum on the edge of town. There's a room of old shoes, another of faded dolls. In one corner sits a battered school desk with a brass plaque. It reads, "Late Victorian, donated anonymously." You run your fingers along the grain of the wood and imagine all the children who once carved initials into the edge. In the dust, you can almost hear their laughter. You walk back slowly through the orchard, the leaves beginning to yellow. Your knees ache, your hands twinge, but your heart no longer flinches at every noise behind you. You begin writing again, not journals, not letters to Miss Blevins, not lesson plans, but a story, a strange one, a governess with a griffin, a tower of beetles, children who turn into wolves when abandoned, but who sing when believed in. You write late into the night, candle flickering low, breath misting the glass, and when it's done, you tuck the pages into an envelope and send it away. Not to an agency, but to a publisher. You don't know if it will be printed, but for the first time, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the voice was yours, that it always was, that it still is. And now, with the candle burnt low and the windows dark against the night, let yourself drift. You've walked through a life that few noticed, but one rich in quiet triumphs and whispered rebellions. You've stood straight when others tried to shrink you. You've taught minds that now roam free. You've mended books, soothed fevers, eaten dry bread in silence. And still, somehow, you laughed. You did not leave grand legacies carved in marble or etched in stone, but you left stories, pressed into the minds of children, tucked into drawers, scrawled into the margins of ledgers and hearts. You were never a heroine in anyone's tale, but you became the author of your own. And as the room softens and the breath in your chest evens, remember this. You were never dismissed. You simply departed, on your terms, no longer a governess, not quite a lady, but something better, yourself. So now, close your eyes, feel the pages settle, the dust drift gently back to the floorboards. Let the echo of chalk and firelight fade, and dream perhaps of a quiet bench in a town that finally lets you rest. No expectations, no keys at your waist, only you, and the peace you've long deserved.